NBC 10 at Issue starts now.
Look up here, I'm in heaven.
Music icon David Bowie died just days after releasing this chilling song, likely his farewell to the world. Today we discuss Philly's love affair with the songwriter and how our town helped launch his and several other famous rockers' careers. Good morning, I'm George Spencer for NBC 10 at Issue. David Bowie's death from cancer last week came as a shock to just about everyone. Few people besides a close inner circle of family and friends knew that the musician was ill. David Bowie was a rock music icon for more than 40 years. He was known for hits like Space Oddity, Changes, and Rebel Rebel. He died 2 days after his 69th birthday. And Bowie also had strong connections to our area. Two of his most famous albums were recorded right here. A marker denotes the spot outside the now defunct Sigma Sound Studio in Center City, where Bowie worked. NBC 10's Denise Nakano has the details.
Yeah, just right here, right?
A tribute to rocker David Bowie outside the old Sigma Sound Studios on 12th Street in Center City. That's where the singer recorded some of his Young Americans album back in the mid-70s.
He was a master of reinvention.
Longtime WMMR DJ Pierre Robert agrees with those who believe that Bowie came to Philly to capture the music magic in the air back then, known as the Philly Sound.
The studio was known to have a very rich tone to it, so a lot of artists recorded there, but to our great surprise and pleasure, he was one of them.
Ground control to Major Tom.
Bowie also recorded his first live album, David Live, at the Tower Theater in Upper Darby. Back in '95, Bowie reminisced with Robert about his long connection to our town.
I had major performances that kind of debuted in Philadelphia, so it is a recurring city in my life.
You know, he was an outcast. I felt like an outcast as a young kid. He was sort of somebody to look to, who was like you if you were not like everybody else.
Someone like David Bowie actually became a role model for success in an unconventional form. His loss is really hitting a lot of people very hard. They're getting this double whammy. We didn't even know he was sick. Now, not only is he sick, he's released a brand new album. His birthday was just a few days ago, and now he's gone.
I'm Denise Nakano for NBC 10 at Issue.
And joining me now is local music historian and publicist Randy Alexander and Michael Tarsia. Tarsia is a recording engineer who worked with David Bowie. He's also the son of Joe Tarsia, the founder of the legendary Sigma Sound Studios. Gentlemen, we thank you so much for being here. And Randy, want to kind of set the table for this conversation a little bit and start with you. We heard in Denise's package the mention of this Philly sound and David Bowie being attracted to that. When you hear the term a Philly sound, what did that mean at that time? What was the attraction?
Well, the Philly sound really was carved and branded through Kenny Gamble and Leon Huff, the sound of Philadelphia.
Big names in Philly.
Philadelphia icons, Philadelphia International Records. You know, they were cranking out hits. They were Philadelphia's answer to Motown in the mid-'70s, which was their peak years.
Right.
And that was their impact on the music industry was so big that they were attracting other artists who wanted to come to Philadelphia to kind of capture the magic, capture that Philly soul. I mean, the Jacksons came here right after Motown and recorded with Gamble and Huff. Elton John did an album later here with Tom Bell, who was partners of Gamble and Huff. David Bowie came here because of what Gamble and Huff brought to Philadelphia.
Right.
But he did not record with Gamble and Huff, but he did record in the same studio, which was Sigma Sound.
Well, I got to say, though, that Gamble and Huff had a pit crew of musicians just like Motown, and Baker Harrison Young is really the reason why Bowie came in, because he wanted to work with the musicians that did all those hits.
So he was attracted by everything else that was happening in the Philadelphia music scene and saw that as something that meshed with what he wanted to be a part of, it sounds like.
Absolutely, and then they didn't want to play with him.
Really?
Yes.
In what way?
Well,
the response was not what he had hoped?
I believe it wasn't what he hoped, because what happened was, Ronnie Baker was a friend of mine, and I was talking to all the musicians, and basically Gamble and Huff and the stuff they were doing for other, groups in town they were on the top, they had 10% of the top 10 chart. So here's a guy coming in with shaved eyebrows and orange hair from another country, and he wants to usurp their sound, and he was basically, and the bands were basically like, why should we play for him and give him our sound?
I'm interested because you referenced that appearance, and for so many people, that is what lingers. In addition to the music, it's just the look, that stage presence, the drama that was the stage presence of David Bowie, and
Absolutely.
then his appearance. That made him a forefront, kind of a forerunner on the cultural front. Who were his influences?
You know, mimes. Bertolt Brecht was a guy that was named a lot. You know, he was an actor, and he saw music as theater.
He looked like Little Richard to me. He was like the
soul part.
70s Little Richard.
But on a broader base, on a broader picture, I mean, he saw music as theater.
Absolutely.
And I don't know that anybody, you know, really knew who the real David Bowie was, because he was always in character, always an actor. He had all these Aladdin Sane, Ziggy Stardust, all these different characters.
Always in persona, it seemed.
Always in persona, and you're coming out, don't forget, you're coming out of the 60s, you're coming out of the Woodstock era, where people were letting their hair down and just free-flowing, and he just brought a whole new futuristic kind of a thing to rock and roll through a theatrical approach.
What other musicians were also influenced by what was happening in Philadelphia and the way he was?
Where do you begin? Gladys Knight and the Pips, Vanessa Williams, I'm just Barry White. I mean,
truly
just,
the biggest names of that
mind,
time.
Yeah.
You know.
I wonder, Mike, from your seat, your perspective, because we think so much about that stage presence that we were discussing, how over the top it was. And yet, when you were in the recording studio environment with him,
right.
I understand your perspective was of the David Bowie who was very respectful, who remembered people's names. Talk to me about that.
When I did a live radio concert with him decades later, and he always said in interviews that those were the amorphous. He didn't remember much of that time from, you know, the era of the partying and everything else. And at the end of the show, we talked for about an hour and a half, and he knew every single person's name down to the janitor, and there was no way he could have researched that. I mean, he must have had a photographic memory, and in the studio during the original recordings of Young Americans, he dressed down very conservatively. He was very soft-spoken, and he was so intelligent that he could multitask. It was amazing.
So in this stage really was a stage character, and in person it sounds like he was a different guy.
Yeah, I think he put on the grease paint, or, you know, put on the whole look, and decided, you know, to go out there and to put a persona on. But behind the persona, there was a lot of thought and depth behind that.
And I got to imagine, as the son of the founder of Sigma Sound Studio, being there when you were younger and witnessing a whole parade of singers and musicians coming through there. David Bowie, chief among them, one among them. How cool that must have been as a younger person to witness that and kind of see it so up close.
You know what? In one way it was because it was rock music and we were known for R&B. And in another way, Joe always said everybody puts their pants on one leg at a time. So we never got impressed by the name, because when you walked in that door, just like him being a different persona, everybody there was an equality going on. We're all working together for the same goal. So,
and he worked hard in the studio. Randy, one thing I was thinking about from your perspective is what kind of kept him coming back? I mean, it seems that Philly really earned a spot in his heart over time. And what was it?
Well, first of all, it predates Philadelphia's place in David Bowie's heart predates Sigma Sound by, we'll say, 1972 is really when it started. When WMMR really broke him in this market, and broke him so strongly that when he wasn't able to maybe draw, you know, several hundred people in most cities around the country, here a couple of promoters named Rick and Stu Green from a company called Midnight Sun decided to take a chance on him and booked him at the Tower Theater. And he ended up playing 3 nights. That's 9,000 seats.
Wow.
3,000 a night, where he could probably do 900 in any other market. So, I mean, that was the big imprint. They were the guys that took the chance on him, and he ended up playing numerous shows, numerous multi-night runs at the Tower Theater over the next year or two. And that was really the springboard.
Very interesting.
Right.
We'll have more to talk about. Randy and Mike, stay right where you are. We'll have more on musician David Bowie and his connection to our area when NBC 10 at Issue comes right back.
Ain't that just like me?
It was a shock. I wasn't prepared. I didn't think this was going to happen for a long time. And he's just, somebody who I grew up with and has been incredibly important to me.
That was a local fan reacting to the death of singer-songwriter David Bowie. Bowie died a week ago from cancer, and we are back now with music publicist Randy Alexander and Mike Tarsia to discuss. Mike, of course, a sound engineer, the son of the founder of Sigma Sound, discussing Bowie's impact on our area. And Randy, you and I were talking. He was someone who was really taken from Philly from the very beginning, but David Bowie paid it back to this city over the years.
He constantly paid it back. Like I said, if you start with WMMR and the Tower Theater in 1972, he kept coming back. First of all, 3 albums in Philadelphia, not 2, 3. He recorded David live at the Tower here,
Right,
obviously.
right.
Young Americans at Sigma.
Right.
And there's a third one in 1978. He recorded parts of a live album here called Stage. He came out on stage and he told the audience, we're going to be recording tonight at the Spectrum, and he taped that. 1983, the Sirius Moonlight Tour,
Right.
which to that point was his probably creative and commercial peak. He did more shows in Philadelphia than any other city. B, the second single from that album, Let's Dance, was called Modern Love.
Right.
And the music video was shot in Philadelphia at the Spectrum during a concert here.
Mike,
And he did the live radio show too.
He did a lot.
he
There's a lot more.
came back
He
to
did a
this
lot of
city
stuff.
time and time
Time
again.
and time again.
And Mike, I know from where you were sitting as a young child with the role of your
As a
family,
teenager,
as a
but-
teenager, with the role of your family and all of this. There's a great story about, obviously he had legion of fans wherever he went, but
Right.
here in Philadelphia there were stories about, especially the young girls who were trying to
Right.
kind of get as close to this superstar as they possibly could, right?
Right. I mean, literally, I would go into the studio and have to climb over bodies. And we were in the red light district, the Bowery. We were next to Chinatown. And during that period, it wasn't the safest of neighborhoods. And all these suburban kids were out there sleeping on the step waiting for David. And one of the stories was that I wound up dating somebody years later. And she told me a story that she was one of those people. And that they went into the Barclay or wherever David was staying, and they stole maids' outfits.
Dressed as maids.
Dressed as maids to get into his room
Just to be
try
that much
get
closer.
to him.
I wonder what each of you gentlemen think about, David Bowie as the outsider, so ostentatious on the stage, perceived as speaking for the outsider by many of his fans, and yet beloved in blue-collar Philadelphia. How did that work, Randy?
It's really strange. Philadelphia has had a knack for latching on to a lot of artists early in their career, especially at that time, those early 70s. Through WMMR, they were breaking Billy Joel, Bruce Springsteen, David Bowie, Yes, and Genesis. And some of those acts are British, some of those acts are American, but for some reason, there's something in the air or in the water here, or as we say, water, that attracts this so-called blue-collar, lunch pail carrying town to great artists. And it comes down to the passion. There's a passion in Philadelphia. You could correlate it right to the sports fans here, a special passion. And I think really that's it. And when they see something that really grabs them, they just embrace it like
You could start
nobody else.
American Bandstand. I mean,
Well,
look,
it could go back
American Bandstand broke so many acts
examples.
nationally.
Right. So I mean, we have a history.
And as you guys were saying, as much as Philly loved David Bowie loved Philly back.
Absolutely.
So, gentlemen, great reminiscing with you and talking about really that
Thanks a lot,
first-hand
George.
perspective. Michael Tarsia, Randy Alexander, thank you so much for
Thank
being
you.
here.